What's going on, everybody? Zack Rosenblatt here from NJ.com, bringing you the latest episode of the Talk is Cheap podcast. I am here with Darryl, Slater. We get to do a positive podcast about the New York Giants, which I don't think we expected to do this week. They got one of their biggest wins in a long time. I think you could argue this or the Seahawks game from last year is the biggest they've had in many years, but considering everything that went into this game, this one might be bigger. But they beat the Saints in New Orleans in overtime. You know, they didn't make it easy. They had a comeback at the end, but they pulled it off. Like, how surprised were you by this result on Sunday?
I mean, shocked. Shocked.
Yeah.
Not necessarily even that they won. I think if you look at the game from the beginning, neither of us thought they would win going in. But then you see this team down 11 points with 7 minutes to go, and you think, okay, it's over. I think we were both writing our stories at that point, like, okay, game's over. In most cases, the probability is the game is over there. And then all of a sudden, Saquon Barkley catches the long touchdown, and away they go. This offense that had not done a whole lot, surging to the finish line. And, it was a pretty gutsy comeback win for a team that was shorthanded on offense, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, you look at it, I think the Giants, in a decision that I probably didn't agree with, it's like 4th and 8, 9 minutes left in the fourth quarter. The Giants are in Saints territory. They're on the 40-something, so it's not like they're that close. But Joe Judge decided to punt it at that point, and they're down 11 points. So the odds of you winning the game from that moment on are pretty low. You need everything to go right. And then it did. You know, they scored that Saquon play. They got stops on defense. They worked their way up the field again, got a field goal. And then in overtime, they worked their way up the field. Great play to Kenny Golladay on the sideline where he ran. He had some good yards after the catch, and then Saquon Barkley ran it home. The biggest takeaway, though, is probably has to be Daniel Jones, right?
Yeah, 4 games in, and yeah, he's had a couple turnovers. Obviously, the interception Sunday, it's almost a Hail Mary throw it out.
Shouldn't really count.
Yeah, but he has been, good to very good throughout this year, and he has
a baseline of good. Yeah,
which is a big step forward for him after a year of regression last year in his second season, and so he went out and he won that game for them. Protection helped, yeah. Skill guys helped, yeah. And we talk a lot about putting pieces around Daniel Jones to help him. But you know what? Let's give him some credit here. A guy who's doing a better job of seeing the field and being more decisive with his throws. And you see how that pays off in a really big spot on the road. Now they're going to go play another big spot road game, which we'll get to. But I think the Giants have to be very encouraged.
Yeah, at the very least, he's shown that he's capable of elevating things around him, and the offensive line has been giving him time, which I think is maybe the biggest shocker of all. But yeah, he's not making the same mistakes. They're taking shots downfield finally, and you saw on the John Ross touchdown, one of the first throws he had of the game was just a beautifully placed ball where there were 2 defenders. He put it only where John could get it, and he's made a lot of plays like that. And the Saquon play, another one that he was patient, waiting for Saquon to get open. That was a play that he and Saquon saw earlier in the game, and they talked about it, and they saw that they might be able to get it, and it was against Marshawn Lattimore, who's an all-pro cornerback. And yeah, he just has a command of the game in a way that I don't think I expected, and he's lived up to all the expectations, and it almost, I guess he's exceeded the expectations,
for sure.
Should say. But, it almost makes you wonder retroactively if this was there the whole time, if they just weren't willing to take the shots down the field last year. He cut down the turnovers last year. He didn't really throw many interceptions, especially second half of the year. And this was this game and the Washington game to an extent were the first ones where Jason Garrett finally was taking shots downfield, having his receivers run different rounds. I think John Ross, just his mere presence, kind of opened things up, especially once he had that long touchdown. Then all of a sudden the defense is starting to tell each other that to get back because you have to watch out for him, and that kind of opens things up in the middle of the field for the short routes. And all the questions we had pretty much were answered except for maybe the pass rush, because Kadarius Toney looked great. All of a sudden he's the most popular guy in town. He had a play where he caught the ball. It was 3rd and 17. He caught at 1 yard beyond the line of scrimmage and then juked his way to get a first down. So he got 17 yards after the catch essentially. Which is really impressive. He looked really good. Kenny Galladay's is the best game he played, and they weren't even necessarily doing what you normally would expect from him. It was a lot of yards after the catch instead of contested plays. And Saquon looked good, and and this was without Sterling Shepard, without Darius Slayton. They had another new left guard. they missed a lot of tackles on defense, and they still just pulled it out. Is really just impressive win, and it's almost like, I mean, again, if they lose on Sunday against the Cowboys, then you're back to kind of square one because 1-4 is tough to get out of. But you feel a little better about this team's chances of, they're probably not going to get killed by anybody. You would think maybe the Chiefs or Bucks or whatever. But if Daniel Jones has the baseline of this, then they can stay in games at least.
I mean, it's crazy to think. I mean, a team that collapses back-to-back weeks, week 2, week 3, again, week 3 against a very bad Falcons team, for them to turn around and go down and beat probably a good but not great Saints team in albeit a really tough environment is, quite the opposite result. I mean, you talk about how quickly things can change in the NFL, and they can, if you're a team that either has resilience or doesn't. You can go from winning obviously one week to just wilting against a bad team. Giants did it the opposite way. They wilted against a bad team. They came back and won in a tough setting, and we'll see what this means for the big picture down the road. It doesn't mean a whole lot if they can't stack some wins. Look, after the Seahawks game last year, they went right back into the toilet. And
yep.
The
Ravens destroyed them. Yeah.
They couldn't hold up. The wind didn't hold up. So let's see if this wind holds up. I think the one point you brought up about throwing the ball down the field, the one difference between that Washington game and in this Saints game was the line was able to do a better job of protecting. If you look at the PFF grades coming out of that, for the Giants line in that Washington game versus the Saints game, you're talking about one of their worst games versus one of their best. I mean, I went back and looked, this is the best pass blocking PFF grade the Giants have had in a game since 2019. So it was better than any of their games last year by a lot.
I mean, they were the worst pass blocking team in the NFL on PFF last year.
Yeah, and so they did a really nice, and let's give another guy credit who has gotten hammered a lot. We talk about Jones getting hammered in terms of is he a bust of a pick, which is all fair questions based on the results. Another guy who's gotten a lot of those questions, all fair again, coming out of last year, is Andrew Thomas.
Yeah.
Right now, Andrew Thomas is one of the best tackles in the NFL. Again, based on how PFF grades it, but
I mean, he's only given up 6 pressures the entire season, no sacks. At this point last year, I think it's something like 17 pressures, 3 sacks, 3 hits.
The guy gave up 57 pressures last year, second most.
And he's on pace to be among he's graded. I mean, Mekhi Becton's injured, but I think he showed up out of shape, which I think was a factor when you were deciding to pick him anyway. I think he's graded out better as a pass blocker than Wirfs and Jedrick Wills. So again, like you said, it was fair to make those criticisms, especially the first half of last year. Coming out of last year, everybody always said he didn't have a preseason. Those guys didn't either. So I don't know if that necessarily it's an excuse generally, but all we can do is compare him to the guys they didn't draft, and now he looks like the real deal. Maybe they drafted him because they thought he'd be ready quicker, but some guys it takes longer. And if he's playing like this, it changes everything. Because I think Rob Sale deserves a lot of credit in the offensive line coaching room, because I still don't think the talent is there on the offensive line, but they got them ready, and I think that's the sign of good coaching. Because Matt Skura, he's a kind of a veteran guy. He's only his 5th year, but he's played a lot. He never played left guard before. He played well. Billy Price improved. He looked pretty rough. He just joined this team a month ago. Will Hernandez has had his struggles this year, last year, since he came to the NFL. I didn't notice him making too many mistakes. Even Nate Solder has looked pretty good, and to the point where he plays every snap at right tackle. Maybe that's an indictment on Matt Parrott, but I don't. 4 out of the 5 offensive linemen, it wouldn't surprise me if 4 of those guys weren't starters for this team next year, and that's kind of crazy to think about. And this is a group that didn't allow a single sack, and I don't think they allowed a QB hit against the Saints, and the Saints have some good pass rushers.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see on the long-term viability of Solder.
For 1 week, it was impressive.
For Hernandez, but you talk about the one guy who you looked at and said, well, Nick Gates, but obviously he's hurt, but you said, here's a young guy who they want to build their line around, and that's Andrew Thomas, and you said it was 6 pressures. I actually wrote a little thing on him earlier this week saying, maybe this line isn't as... The gist of it was, here's another opportunity for this line to play well. Because as much as we talked about the noise in New Orleans, the Saints have the worst pass rush in the NFL. The Cowboys are not very effective either. So here's another chance in a big road setting for the Giants line to play better than everyone expected. The Giants line isn't going to come out of this and say, yeah, we play great, but they have bad PFF pass rush rating. Okay, they're not going to say that. This is a line that can't be picky and choosy. They got to play well, even against the teams they should play well against. And with Thomas, if you look at the pressures, it was 2 in the first game, 2 in the second. He's allowed 1 pressure in each of the last 2 games.
That's crazy.
That is insane.
And that's probably average 50 offensive snaps a game. Maybe not all of them are passing plays. They threw it a lot this last game. But, even Daniel Jones, who, he kind of gives generalizations. He was yeah, it makes a huge difference. And Andrew Thomas is playing that well. I think everybody knew that he was better than he showed last year. And I think he's showing it now. And, the ceiling of this team is a lot higher when you have, and I wrote about this in my day after story, when you have, like, the guys that you invested heavily in playing well. They had, I think the four cornerstones of the win is what I called it on Sunday. You could say were Saquon Barkley, Daniel Jones, Andrew Thomas, Kadarius Toney. Those are 4 of their last 4 first-round picks. That's like pretending Dexter Lawrence and DeAndre Baker aren't in the mix. Like the top guys they drafted. Dexter made a couple plays. He still hasn't done.
Top of the draft.
Yeah, he still hasn't done as much as a pass rusher as you need. But when you have again, we criticize Dave Gettleman a lot. I think you can question a lot of process in a lot of those picks. But he deserves praise because these guys look talented, and when they're playing at their best, like their talent level on offense is very intriguing. Like they can do so many different things. I think there's still debate about whether you can trust Jason Garrett to deploy them. He did a good job against the Saints. He still wasn't perfect. He's made a lot of questionable decisions, including the Evan Engram end around, which he's obsessed with because it worked once last year. They did that in the red zone and it failed miserably. Everybody in the building saw it coming. To give it to Kadarius Toney on that play, not a guy that can make guys miss. If the offensive line's not making the holes, anyway. The point being, they can just throw, especially when Shepard and Slayton, who might return this week. When you have everybody available, they have so many different things they can throw at the defenses, and it's very interesting. They have the most intriguing collection of weapons they've had in, I don't know, maybe since those Super Bowl years, if that even, because they just have so many different ways you have Kenny Galladay, who can go deep, and he's a possession guy. You have John Ross, Darius Slayton, deep guys. Kadarius Toney, I don't know if there's many receivers like him. Maybe he can't do a lot of the stuff as much down the field and go up and get a ball, but he has some shiftiness I haven't really seen receivers before. And then you have Shepard, who's old, reliable, and I don't know. What do you think about this offense going forward? Because you feel a little bit better just based on the personnel they have at least.
I think the
personnel's not the problem anymore.
Not for skill wise.
Yeah, not skill wise. Yeah.
I think as you look at the line, and just to revisit one thing, you're talking about giving Rob Sale some credit, and we did a big story at the end of last week about how the line had been pretty dismal, and they had been, and they were in a state of disarray, and those are kind of words I think we both use in the story. And one of the points that we brought up in the story, and really only brought this up because Jeff Schwartz mentioned it.
Yeah.
I think Jeff is a pretty smart guy, but he kind of threw this out there as a hypothesis, not so much as a hard and fast thing.
Because he's not in the room, obviously.
Yeah, but he knows. Yeah. He knows what he's talking about. He said, he wonders, do they have too many coaches? Do they have too many voices in the line room? I hadn't really thought of that. I thought it was an interesting point because you do have Rob Sale, you do have Pat Flaherty, and then
Freddie Kitchens and Ben Wilkerson.
Ben Wilkerson. Of course, you're always going to have an assistant line coach, and that's Ben Wilkerson. But you really have 3 prominent coaches in terms of Freddie Kitchens, Rob Sale,
who they all have who they're getting different instruction from. And all
Pat
3 of them.
Flaherty. Yeah. So we got a chance to ask Andrew Thomas about. Of course, he's not going to say. Andrew Thomas is not going to say it sucks.
Yeah.
But he did say,
that's unique. Yeah.
You do have to pick and choose what you digest from each coach's instruction. And one thing we saw at the end of last week, I thought this was really interesting. Pat Flaherty was out here working
for 20 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah. Rob Sale wasn't there. Presumably he was doing something else, but he was working with it. So maybe it is not as much of a liability as we thought for a young developing.
Yeah, I was saying
maybe it helps
in the situation the Giants are in, which is a mess of their own making in general. But when you have all these guys that are coming off the street, maybe you need a veteran like Pat Flaherty, who's been here, who's around forever and coached up some great offensive lines. Freddie, they seem to trust and value his opinion, and then you have Rob Sale, who's the coach.
So maybe they can make it work.
But if this is a group of veterans and guys you trust, but they haven't had an offensive line like that in years here, so maybe that was the thought process. It whether it works or not, it is a unique situation, and I'm very curious to see how that plays out the rest of the year. And one thing that I also find interesting that they haven't really done the rotations on the offensive line. I don't know if that's a Rob Sale decision or what. But that's the thing. Joe Judge talks every week.
He talks like they're going to rotate every week,
and then they haven't lately. And you think they would have at left guard in particular. And Matt Parrott has basically just been relegated to a full-on backup role.
And Wes Martin didn't play. Obviously, he just got. We asked him about Bredesen just now after practice. I said, so I presume Skura will be the left guard. He'll be part, and then he says he'll be part of it with Wes Martin.
Yeah.
It's dude. There has been no part of it. There's no part
it's
of
one
it.
Guy.
It's one guy, which is the way most teams.
Yeah, well,
operate.
I think offensive linemen prefer it that way too.
Of course.
So the offensive line, that's going to be if you're looking at, it's easy to overreact, especially for this team when they win. It's easy to overreact everything. So I think out of everything, I think offensive line's the one I'm least confident that can play as good as it did. I'm not saying it's impossible. They clearly showed they're capable of playing well, and they haven't been terrible in any week. They've been rough at points, but they've been a baseline of pretty average or slightly below it even, which is a step up from last year. But I am very curious to see how that holds up in the coming weeks. And then the other side of the ball, the defense. There's still some. The pass rush is a huge concern. Patrick Graham has this thing where he refuses to talk about past games when we talk to him on Thursday, so it's tough to get anything of why it's not. He thinks it's not working. They're not getting pass rush in any fashion. They had 0 hits and 0 sacks against the Saints. They're pretty close to that, I believe, against the Falcons. I think Ojulari had 1 sack. Lorenzo Carter and O'Shane Ziman, Ziman is in particular, but both of them have just been complete non-factors. And these guys are playing most of the snaps at outside linebacker. Leonard Williams has 1 sack. He's kind of back to getting pressures but not sacks, which is fine if you have pass rushers around him, which they don't right now. And I just don't know where that pass rush is going to come from, especially, Jabril's good as a blitzer, but he's hurt and he might not play on Sunday. They just kind of have to roll with who they have. I don't know what they can do to change this up, but how big of a concern do you have with that?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely going to be a concern for when you play, a quarterback who you can kind of rattle in the pocket. Obviously, Dak Prescott is one of those guys you have to pen in a little bit and maybe keep him from running, maybe more so than...
And they have weapons all over the field.
Yeah, so. Maybe more so than just going after him. But there's going to be games where they can do the go-after-him approach, whether that's, you think about Sam Darnold and the Panthers, who they're going to be playing in a couple weeks. Derek Carr, maybe, right? You can kind of go after those guys a little bit more than you can Dak Prescott, Patrick Mahomes. Not just talking about their mobility, but the other things you mentioned, having to account for the guys down the field. So, this is going to be like, they use a cliche, the chickens come home to roost type situation. Whatever. It could bite them in the butt. Let's be honest, or whatever.
Well, and that's why it was hard to come out. I think that's why you come out of the Saints game and you see that the Giants were still 7-point underdogs, which maybe some people were surprised about. But the Cowboys, number one, have looked really good, 3-1. The Cowboys are a team that
really good offense.
The Cowboys are a team that's always going to have some games that they lose where you're like, what? Either they blow it at the end or they get destroyed by someone they shouldn't. So you can't rule out the possibility the Giants can beat them. I think they're a tougher matchup than the Saints were, weirdly, because the Saints, Jameis Winston has the ability. He actually played pretty well. They kept subbing him out for Taysom Hill for whatever reason, but he has the ability to beat you. But you're not scared of Jameis Winston. The receivers are kind of nothing. It's all Alvin Kamara, and they contained Alvin Kamara to the point where he didn't get a single target, which is a credit to Patrick Graham. But yeah, they scare you less. They were without their left tackle and their center. The Cowboys have one of the better offensive lines. If it might wind up being a high-scoring game, and I don't know if we'll find out if the Giants have the juice to match them point for point.
Yeah, because as well as the offense played, let's be honest, Giants scored 21 points in regulation, and they wound up with 27.
They got it all at the very end of the game. Yeah,
I mean, and I think I looked up the number. I was like, man, this is a lot of yards for the Giants. When's the last time they had this many yards? I think it was 2019, right? But then it was also an overtime game in 2019. So they got a lot. They got yards in overtime in the overtime drive. So will they be able to? Can they get into the 30s?
And they still need to finish drives, and they just don't do that. And they still. I mean, this kind of goes back to a criticism judges had all year. He's kind of been mocked for because of some of his quotes last week. They still play so conservatively in high pressure situations. 4th down in the opposing territory. It was 4th down. I think it was 4th and 3 from the 39-yard line of the Saints, and they kicked a field goal, and they missed the field goal. But even if they had made it, it almost was irrelevant. That's a situation you have to go for. I think they were losing at that point. I'm this isn't a team that should be playing it conservative. When you're a team that is losing, you should be taking risks and trying to change things. And I just don't get Joe Judge's reticence for going for it on 4th down in the opposing territory.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of those that you kind of scratch your head, for sure.
Especially if it's going to be a high-scoring game where, I know he says he trusts the defense, but the defense hasn't played as well. They're pretty banged up on the back end now. They don't really have anyone they trust at nickel corner. The Cowboys are going to, line up CeeDee Lamb in the slot. They can't afford to punt it away in situations. I know they want to play the field position game, but Dak Prescott will eat you alive.
I mean, there's a good chance they're going to have to score 30 points to win this game and win it in regulation. So, yeah, you wonder, can they do that? Because, like you said, I mean, the Cowboys' offensive line has the ability to let, especially against a lackluster Giants pass rush, the ability to let Dak Prescott sit back there and pick the Giants apart. And so that's got to concern Patrick Graham. I mean, it definitely has to concern him. Even though he didn't want to talk about their poor pass rush last week, okay. I mean, it's still an issue.
Yeah, and the other issue is they're tackling. The PFF had them with 15 missed tackles. They might have had 10 of them on the one Taysom Hill play where he scored.
Yeah.
And it was an obvious issue. Tay Crowder so linebackers coach Kevin Scherer explained it today. Usually you want the first guy to go for the tackle and the second guy to go for the strip, and they got the order wrong. And Tay Crowder tried going for the strip, so Taysom Hill basically threw him aside. He broke 3 more tackles on his way to the end zone. They had a lot of missed tackles that game. I think you're really seeing that they're missing Blake Martinez because he's a guy that just really didn't miss tackles. At the very least, he had issues, but so that's something that, especially against Zeke Elliott, Tony Pollard, and those receivers, like these are guys that are going to break your tackles if you're not, sound in your technique, and that's a real big concern I have because they don't really have. They're going with all these young guys in linebacker now, and Blake's not coming back this year.
Yeah, I mean, that's going to be something that could be a liability when you have a kid like Crowder who gets a little overly eager in that spot and doesn't remember to do, let's be honest, the right thing. He just did the wrong thing in that spot.
So how do you see this game going?
I can go take a look at my pick here. I sent it to you guys on Tuesday, so as we're going through it here. I don't think I picked the Giants to win. I would have to, sorry, I'm just still going
Sorry.
Why don't you...
Well, I haven't actually officially done my pick. I'm going to pick the Cowboys. I think the Giants can keep it close. I'll say 28-24. I just think they're going to have a really tough... I know Amari Cooper's banged up, but the Cowboys... the Giants defense hasn't shown me enough to believe they can shut them down. So that's kind of where I stand on that.
Yeah, I can't find it in the email, but I'll say... I'll say the Cowboys are going to score 31. I think the Giants maybe 24, something like that. Low to mid 20s. I don't think the Giants can get to. I talked about it. Don't think they can get to 30. This Cowboys line is going to make things really difficult on the Giants. I think in terms of giving Dak Prescott a lot of time.
All right, we'll wrap it up on that note. We're flying out to Dallas this weekend, and we'll get you guys another episode next week. Thanks for listening. Subscribe if you're not subscribed, and we'll talk to you soon.